Jane Koger lives on the tallgrass prairie south of the Kansas Turnpike, where Little Cedar Creek winds its way through the Flint Hills, a few miles from Matfield Green. She built a house constructed of hay bales and designed with sustainability in mind, using wind power and solar energy to live off the grid in the middle of open pasture land. She grew up in the Flint Hills and has lived in Chase County for most of her life.
My family had land in Chase County, and my mother had grown up several generations in Chase County. My dad was new to the county. He came here to manage cattle for an uncle, and that's when they met and married. And so on my mother's side, there was land in this county.
Jane's family also owns land west of Wichita near Medicine Lodge. She lived there for a period of time when she was younger.
My family had a ranch, still has it, in Kiowa County, so I was out there for a while. And then I was in Idaho for about 18 months. I went to Idaho to go backpacking, and I fell in love with the state, and I thought, I'll just stay out here.
Although she was attracted to the natural beauty she found in Idaho and spent a year in college there, she couldn't resist the urge to return to her ranching roots in Kansas. She came back to the family's ranch in western Kansas first, and then on back to the Flint Hills.
When I decided I wanted to come back from Kiowa County, my sister and I bought some land. At this time, my mother was no longer living, but my aunt worked at the abstract office. And she called me one day and she said, Jane, do you know your great-grandparents homesteaded that land you and Kay are buying? I mean, is that unbelievable? A lot of people do know that their land has passed from generation to generation, and it did never leave the family. This was sold in 1915, and in 1979, my sister and I bought it back. Hence, the name The Homestead. My ranch name came from that. And it's just like, it gives me goosebumps to talk about it now. It has always given me goosebumps. And I've always known that I am where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I've ranched for most of my life here with a cow-calf operation, and that was the part of it I enjoyed the most. But I also leased part of the ranch for summer cattle, which is what's done in Chase County a lot, in this area where they ship them in the spring to put on weight before going to the feedlot.
The way that she handles her cattle relies upon such practices as enticing them with tasty treats called range cubes, rather than herding them on horseback.
The ranching practices that I've established here are probably kinder, gentler ranching. Some of the ways we're probably different on this ranch is that we don't have any horses, so we use ATVs, UTVs, cubes, get the cattle to follow us and then follow them with another. We can take cattle out of a pasture and have them in the pens ahead of us. Not the whole herd, obviously, but if they get ahead of us, they don't go down the road or go someplace else. They know where they're supposed to go. We've taught the cattle to do that.
Jane has collaborated with many different specialists in range management and grasslands ecology over the years. She developed an integrated approach that has garnered several awards for her stewardship and innovation.
It was an evolution. I started out gung-ho, all about cattle and everything. And the people I met along the way on my journey kept drawing me back to the natural resource, to the grass. And at some point that did just stick, you know, where it spoke to me in some way. And I realized, yeah, that's what it's really about. It's about the land. It's about the earth. It's not about what's above it. And grass needs to be harvested, so you put a cow in it. And that's how you harvest the crop. But what it's really about is the grass. I feel an urge to learn as much about it as I can, because I don't think we have any idea about prairies. I mean, I know there's been a lot of research done, but we haven't been focused on grasslands. There isn't anything sexy about a grassland. It's not a mountain. It's not a stream in the mountains. It's not an ocean. You know, so I just think part of it is giving people the opportunity to come out and experience the grasslands.
Beginning in the 1980s, Jane issued a special invitation to women who were interested in spending time on a ranch when she launched a residential program that proved to be quite popular.
I did a program called Prairie Women, where people paid me to come work my cattle, which was, well, it was kind of genius at the time. But the thing that I learned from Prairie Women, because people always thought that was just a one-way street, they were having a great time. But number one, it allowed me to stay on the ranch, but still have interaction with all kinds of people. So that was enjoyable for me. It expanded my world, even though I was staying in a single place, a small place in some ways. I mean, for what's offered here, I mean, it's agriculture. It's not like you have the theater and a lot of other things. But also, Prairie Women, you know, we'd work cattle all day and we'd be cleaning up afterwards. And I think, you know, we're losing daylight, or as I always like to say, daylight's burning. You know, we need to get everything cleaned up. And they'd be going, wow, look at that sunset. And so they helped me to see this as a place, not just as a business. And that was, I think that was a huge piece of it, is that they'd stop and say, hey, what's this flower? Or, you know, they didn't just want to work all the time. They wanted to enjoy it too. And sometimes you, especially with agriculture, I think we just get so caught up in what we're doing that we don't see how lucky we really are. And so I have no doubt I'm the luckiest person in the world.
Jane's desire to share her love of the prairie with others has been credited with laying the foundation for Symphony in the Flint Hills, now an annual affair that moves to various locations throughout the region. Organizers note that it was preceded by a similar gathering hosted by Jane Koger on the Homestead Ranch.
Yes, the Symphony on the Prairie was here in 1994, and I've never known why I like classical music, because I didn't grow up with it, but I do like classical music. And I knew that my friends in the rural areas, my friends out here, weren't going to go listen to an orchestra. Now, why I thought they should, I'll never know, but that's probably just projection. But I knew my friends in the city loved to come to the country. So somehow I got this idea that it'd be fun to listen to an orchestra on the side of a hill. And it was during Prairie Women, and I just put the idea out there because I thought someone is going to know how to do this and what the connection should be. You know, this is like just throw it to the wind and see what happens. Well, a friend of mine was visiting, and we had a John Deere tractor that the fuel gauge didn't work on. And darned if we didn't run it out of diesel in this pasture where I was trying to cut prairie hay. And so while we're trying to get it started again, she said to me, so Jane, what's your next idea? And I said, well, I've been thinking I ought to try and do a symphony on the prairie, da-da-da-da-da. And that was all that was said. The tractor started, I finished mowing hay, and we went home. And so the next morning, she came to breakfast and she goes, I've been thinking about that, and I think I know somebody that could make that happen. And that's how it happened.
The orchestra assembled for the performance on the Homestead Ranch in 1994 was composed entirely of female musicians. Women have likewise played a key role in the establishment and operation of Symphony in the Flint Hills, which presented its first collaboration with the Kansas City Symphony in the summer of 2006.
Welcome to the News Hour. New findings out tonight show the main cause of the climate crisis is rapidly getting worse. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere hit record levels in the spring, the highest in more than 4 million years.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration also reports the buildup of the heat-trapping gas is accelerating.
I think it's a background force that's driving a lot of reactivity. I mean, the psychologist in me says some of the divisiveness in our culture may be being driven by a different anxiety than the topic of the debates. I mean, as a species, we're facing severe impingements from climate change on everything about the way we live. And how does that affect people? They may not think, well, I'm scared because of climate change. They just may act more reactive than usual because anxiety is boosting up.
With funding from Humanities Kansas, Lerner convened half a dozen gatherings around the state, inviting participants to break into small groups to converse with each other after listening to his own remarks, along with a bit of indigenous wisdom, or indigenuity as Dan Wildcat calls it.
I mean, one of the things that surprised me in starting Step by Step Kansas is that people seem unusually willing to talk about it now in a way that 5 years ago I don't think they would have been.
We talk a lot in our places like Haskell we talk about 7 generations. We talk about thinking about our responsibilities for 7 generations into the future. I'm asking you to think about something really radical, and that is broaden your notion of persons to include different than human persons on the planet, who, by the way, have a lot to teach us. They have lessons to teach us about how we can be more competent, mature human beings. Again, that's not romanticism. I call that indigenous realism.
And so it gets at the notion of coming together for a very challenging, large cause. We can't make a change if we don't have people coming together to talk about it.
The step-by-step gathering in Topeka took place in a hall connected to Grace Cathedral, where the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Kansas has their office. The Right Reverend Cathleen Bascom became the first female to assume that role, being formally consecrated by the Most Reverend Michael Curry, presiding Bishop of the Episcopal Church, in March of 2019.
Be a faithful steward of God's holy word and sacrament. Now, Kansas, stand up and greet your new bishop and her family.
Our diocese, and that's the geographic region, is the eastern 40% of Kansas. There are 44 churches in the diocese, and the clergy are my flock in a way, and the parishes are my flock. And I interpret that responsibility isn't just to those churches.
Bishop Bascom considers each parish to be inclusive of the surrounding natural environment in which it exists, and she believes it's necessary to engage with issues that may sometimes be politically polarizing. Before she was elected bishop, she was appointed to a national task force on creation care developed by the Episcopal Church.
Earth stewardship, another way to talk about it, and care of creation, I think is actually less polarized than many things, that people of both and all political parties, many are engaged.
She has also been personally engaged with the international climate conferences organized through the United Nations.
The Episcopal Church had a delegation virtually to the Council of Parties, both COP26 and COP27. And out of that, a number of us who live in the Midwest region, we call ourselves the Great Middle. So we've been meeting virtually to just get people to come online and to hear more about the realities of climate change and the effects and the climate disasters and the changes. Just inviting people into conversation and trying to learn how to not hit hot buttons, but to say we respect one another. So to try to have that conversation, knowing how precious the earth is, and that this is what we call in religious terms a kairos moment, which means a holy and a time to get after it, that we are called in this moment to work on it.
In addition to encouraging such conversations, the bishop has developed a Creation Trustees network.
It really grew out of a story of going to Blue Rapids and Marysville, where we have churches, and having time with one of our older members there, who I learned was from a church called St. Hilda's. And he pointed toward Tuttle Reservoir, and he said, well, St. Hilda's is there in the bottom. It was one of those towns that was taken. And that just really moved me. I was like, wow, St. Hilda's is at the bottom. And he was very concerned about Tuttle Reservoir silting in and what that's going to mean for all these communities in the Kansas River watershed. But so that kind of set me. So he is one of my creation stewards, somebody who, has land up in that region, was talking to me about things he was doing. If we can build this network of Episcopalians devoted to keeping their rangeland and not developing it, that's the kind of thing we're doing.
With a special affinity for tallgrass prairie, the bishop has demonstrated her understanding and appreciation of the important environmental role it plays with the publication of a novel based upon prior experiences in Iowa.
So when I was in Iowa, the 2008 flood occurred, and in downtown Des Moines, I was dean of the cathedral there, and I came to learn that, part of the reason that Iowa was suffering so much from flooding, it was climate change and what was going on in the atmosphere, but also that Iowa has only 1/1000th of its original tallgrass prairie left. So with losing all of that biomass under the earth, the rivers were flooding, and I could see in Des Moines that really see the suffering of people of least economic means. And often people of color are the ones who suffer most in those climate events, and was able to see that firsthand, and it came together with this understanding that, wow, it's all interwoven. So that's Of Green Stuff Woven is the title. It comes from Walt Whitman, his famous Leaves of Grass, and that idea that humanity, what happens to whatever our environment is, the earth, the grasslands, happens to humanity.
In the aftermath of the flooding in Iowa, she says the decision was made to recreate a small prairie in downtown Des Moines to teach people about the role it plays in maintaining water quality and mitigating the impact of floods. When she assumed her new position in Kansas, she brought a version of that idea with her.
We've been trying to develop our land as well, right? So our 3 acres here, the diocese since 1860 has had a parcel of land here, and it used to be 20 acres. And now, Grace Cathedral's on it, Topeka High School is on the land. And, we are trying to be important stewards and just put in this urban green space with a teaching prairie, culinary garden, spiritual life garden, an outdoor chapel dedicated to the Episcopal African American Church that was closed in 1964. So remembering St. Simon's. But we are kind of the center of these other church properties. So we have 18 around the diocese that are on church lands, and trying to have church lands also, what can we do for biodiversity, for, water use? And what's been kind of cool is that sometimes it's the churches who are littler, fewer people, who've kind of, not been seen as the big heroes in much of the 20th century as these large urban churches are growing and lots of wealth. They suddenly see the riches they have environmentally, and are kind of some of our new heroes. They're putting in postage stamp prairies. They're able to do it, they're helping to clean various lakes, by what they're putting along the waterfront. Anyway, I think that's a wonderful story about kind of the last shall be first, and it's fun to see it. We have to do everything in our power as agents. That's what we're called to do, and that's what brings us alive. In terms of is it too late, I think that, say, with the Creation Trustees Network, we work toward mitigation. I think we still can have a mitigating effect. Again, the grasslands are pretty important. I almost see the Flint Hills as a bit like our Amazon.
It covered a large portion of North America historically. It ranged from the Prairie Peninsula that stretched into Indiana and parts of Ohio, and then from Canada to Texas. So it was one of the largest, most significant grasslands in North America. And it's mostly gone. Most of it's been plowed to support the breadbasket of North America. And so only about 4% of the native prairie remains, and the largest portions of that are here in the Flint Hills of Kansas.
As with the Amazon's rainforests, the grasslands of the world have the capacity to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and store it underground, helping mitigate the impact of greenhouse gases on global warming. In the Flint Hills near Manhattan, Kansas, extensive research into the dynamics of prairie ecosystems has been carried out at the Konza Prairie Biological Station for more than 50 years, when the first of its 8,600 acres were acquired by the Nature Conservancy to serve as a field station for Kansas State University, with funds provided by prairie-loving philanthropist Catherine Ordway. A professor of biology at K-State, John Blair serves as the director of Konza Prairie.
When Konza Prairie was first established, the three main topics that were focused on were fire, grazing by large ungulates, and climate variability. And the reason for that was that fire, grazing, and climate are the three major factors that we think historically were important in making this prairie what it is. So we looked at those early on in the program as the natural factors that determine the prairie, and we studied their influence on the plants and animal communities and ecosystem processes. But if you think about each of those are now directly impacted by human activity, either directly or indirectly. So humans control fire frequency and when and how frequent, what time of the year prairies burn. They've replaced bison with cattle grazing, and they're managed, so we manage the grazing system. And then the climate is changing because of anthropogenic influence as well. So all of those three major factors that were think about them as the natural drivers of the tall grass prairie, are now influenced by humans. So over time, the research program has focused more and more on understanding how humans are changing the environment and how that influences the ecology of tall grass prairies. The climate has changed in the past, and we know that it's done that over scales of millennia, over millions of years. So I've been teaching at Kansas State University for 30 years. 30 years ago, the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration was about 320. It's 412 now. That is an incredible change over a short period of time. For millions of years, the carbon dioxide level was nowhere near where it's at now. So the two things that I think are the biggest factors to consider is that the environment is changing in ways that we haven't seen over literally hundreds of millions of years. And it's changing at a rate that's just unprecedented. And the third thing is that these changes are clearly linked to human activity. There aren't natural sources of carbon dioxide that are leading to this change. We can link them clearly to the burning of fossil fuels primarily, and to land use changes secondarily. So we know what the causes are. We're getting a better and better idea of how ecosystems are going to respond to these changes. I think the only thing that we seem to be lacking at the moment is the political will to do something about it.